Smell is so important. And I know a lot of agents will tell their sellers, oh, just put some plugins in and that'll cover the smell up of the dog or whatever. And what a lot of agents don't realize, there's families with chemical sensitivity. I had a buyer, the husband walked into the kitchen. It was during holiday season. And yes, it was festive, burning that pumpkin candle. And what they didn't realize is my buyer had to leave immediately due to the toxic, overload that he experienced. His eyes started to swell. He started having trouble breathing. He had asthma. We didn't even get past the kitchen and we had to leave. So unfortunately, that seller did lose out on a potential buyer that, didn't even get to see the rest of the property.
Hello, and welcome to your Indoor Air podcast brought to you by Change the Air Foundation. My name is Kendra Seymour. Our guest today is Tori McGee. She's a holistic realtor certified in building biology, and she really specializes in helping buyers find homes that support their health, especially those who are maybe mold sensitive or have other environmental concerns. She takes a unique approach to real estate, going beyond just, the square footage and the curb appeal and does the kitchen look nice, to look at factors like indoor air quality and moisture and potential toxins. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what it means to kind of take this holistic approach to home buying, some of the biggest red flags to watch for when touring a home, and how to navigate maybe disclosures and inspections and contracts with health in mind. So if you're on the hunt for a safe and healthy home, this episode is packed with expert insights that I promise you won't want to miss. So thank you so much, Tori, for being here.
Yo, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this, and it's so important to have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad to connect with someone like yourself, because from the beginning of the home hunting process through once you're in it, like there's so many factors that kind of travel or kind of come together in this journey to, live in healthier homes. And you are like that very first stop. So I'm so glad we're having this conversation. But before we jump in, I do need to take a moment to say a huge thank you to two of our sponsors, Celtic IAQ and Mold Mentor LLC. Now, we love partnering with companies like these because it's their passion for safer and healthier indoor environments and homes that really make our work possible, and their support helps our education initiatives and our policy reform and even our research projects. So a huge thank you to both of those companies. And if you want to learn more about them, you can head on over to our website at changetheairfoundation.org and click on our corporate partners tab. So let's jump in, Tori, because when I was putting together the questions for this interview, I think I had like 14, and that's a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So let's start with first, how would you define like a holistic approach to real estate, and how does it influence the way you help buyers find a healthier home? Because you are not a typical realtor. So talk to us about what that looks like and how you're different.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes. So basically, I like to look for, what the client's needs are, and we all have different needs and we're all dealing with different situations. So I like to have a conversation with my buyers, find out a little bit about them and what's been going on with them. And they usually will come to me and reach me and have their concerns. So we have conversations. We have different needs. I have children that have different, special needs. I've got families that have EMF sensitivity, of course, the mold sensitivity, past clients, and basically just, having that information out there, for them to find me. So once we start talking, it's just, finding out a little bit about them.
Yeah, and what their priorities are right now. And we probably should have started with this, but like you got into this field kind of for a specific reason, right? It was like your own family's kind of journey and story. So can you talk to us about kind of what made you shift into this field and in this way?
Yeah. So I was, obviously in the more health and wellness, over the years, with my own family's journey, my daughter at 7, ADHD, not really knowing, about that. And then realizing, oh, I've got so many different chemicals and products in my own home and what we're feeding and what we're doing for our own family. So after, I started on my journey, we were looking to buy a house. And after talking to multiple agents, not really quite understanding what my needs were, I decided to, my husband and I were like, okay, well, why don't you get your license so you can help navigate through for us? And so I did. And then once we, went through the process, it just kind of took off. People started, finding me locally and us having, caring about what to look for in that process. And that's how I got started was from my own journey, having questions that other agents didn't quite understand.
Mhm. And I think that can be, it's really, I think, challenging sometimes if you haven't gone through like multiple chemical sensitivities or mold related illness to understand why asking certain questions like up front and eliminating certain homes or having certain concerns are so at the forefront of people's minds. Because I think, when I was buying our first home many years ago now, I remember it was a competitive market. There weren't a lot of homes available, especially in our price range. And when we found one, we fell in love. There was a bidding war. They picked us and we thought we did everything right. We got the home inspection. And I remember they called us and they're like, swing by after work. They had found moisture in the basement. And we negotiated with the seller to like open it up. And Lord knows, I think it was probably just like a handyman. And we swing by after work, and it's my husband and me and our realtor and their realtor and this handyman in the basement with this open wall that we now know had mold and water damage, but there's no protections. No one's, raising alarm bells. And I remember thinking, like, we wouldn't be standing here if this was safe, right? These are the professionals. And really, the part that still stands out to this day is when their realtor overheard me say that and said to me, well, there are two other offers in this envelope who would love to see yours fall through. And I panicked. I was like, no, I already pictured bringing my future children home here. And sure, we'll take care of it. We later had to go back and readdress that area, but we won't get into that story. But this journey, I think, unless you're being really conscious about it when you're home buying, doesn't always get the time and attention when it comes to some of these environmental things. So I love that you created the realtor that you wish you had had, essentially, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So let's then talk into then. So when you're going through a home with one of your clients, are there like certain things that you're doing with your buyers to kind of help them assess a home's risk for maybe mold or other issues, like especially when there are no signs? Are there red flags you look for? So I'm talking before you even put in an offer. How are you kind of eliminating homes, from the get-go?
What a great that's a great question. I get that all the time. And I usually will talk to the buyers what the expectations are during our showing, just to kind of give them a heads up. You also want to look at like when you first assess the home. Of course, pictures, you're not going to be able to see a lot. So get out there, look at the property. How is the drainage? How is the grading? Is all the water going towards the property or is it flowing away? That's the first thing you can see immediately. And then on the outside of the home, before you even go in, you can take a look for rotten wood. Are the gutters, really secure? Are they overfull with leaves and debris? Could that pose a problem for intrusion? And then when you get into the house, I always bring a flashlight
I
and
love
just
that.
shine shine it everywhere. Look at your baseboards, look for staining, look up, look under sinks. Just really assess for any type of like warped wood. Do you see staining? Is it on a slab? Go in the garage. And another important, besides the visible with that, smell. Smell is so important. And I know a lot of agents will tell their sellers, "Oh, just put some plugins in and that'll cover the smell up of the dog or whatever." And what a lot of agents don't realize, there's families with chemical sensitivity. I had a buyer, the husband walked into the kitchen. It was during holiday season. And yes, it was festive, burning that pumpkin candle. And what they didn't realize is my buyer had to leave immediately due to the toxic, overload that he experienced. His eyes started to swell. He started having trouble breathing. He had asthma. We didn't even get past the kitchen and we had to leave. So unfortunately, that seller did lose out on a potential buyer that, didn't even get to see the rest of the property. So that's a lot of that as well. So those are important key factors.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, like this is true even with rentals, like, bring a bag, or if you have a purse or something, have a flashlight. You could even sneak in a moisture meter, do a pinless one so you're not leaving little holes in their thing. And you can head on over to our website, changetheairfoundation.org. If you go to resources, we have a whole free download section, and there's the 5 signs of water damage. So you can like print that off. There's also like a diagram of where to look in a home, and you can kind of like stealthily, like, investigate. Now there, and we'll get to this because I want to talk about how do you not accidentally scare a seller off and they'll be like, oh, we're not going to pick your offer.
Right.
You seem high maintenance. So we'll get to that. But sticking to like with the initial when you're going through, are there any like red flags in listings like flips or homes sold as is? Like, is there anything that kind of clues you into like maybe there's more going on to this home that we're just not even going to spend time on?
Yes, that's an amazing question because I get that all the time. And then sometimes buyers will even forget about that. And that is so flips are a concern. And for multiple reasons, you usually don't have a disclosure. And I know a lot of that is just so important to know the history of the home. And I know there's other ways that you can pull, different reports and stuff. So that is a number one. And just having conversations with the listing agent. And I know a lot of states, are buyer beware. So, that's a huge problem.
So let's talk about then just we'll pivot for a second because like how do we get as much information about a property as possible? Like what is covered? I know disclosures vary by state, so we're not giving, any kind of like legal or official advice. But what do people need to know about disclosures? What does it mean when we say buyer beware? Talk to us about all those things.
So yeah, buyer beware is, you need to do a really good job as the buyer. You need to hire your real estate professional that can, help guide you, give you different resources, different vendors to go out during your inspection period. And if we want to just go on into that conversation, make sure that your realtor does help you navigate through that process and giving you enough timeline. And if it is a competitive market, you can still win the house and not giving up those important testing that is for the health of your family.
Mhm.
So I would just say continue having conversations with your realtor. And for me personally, I always, have the home inspector come out, but I also suggest an HVAC company come out, open it up, see what's going on, with your unit, have a roofer come out. Because, some days your home inspector on a rainy day or maybe a day it's windy, they can't get the drone up there and they might not climb on top of your roof to see how is everything going with, the sealed boots, possible some flashing, around your chimney. How does everything look? Are there any missing shingles? So that's so important because we really can't see that. That's not something that we, can take a look at. And also, I it's unbelievable radon testing. I mean, it is I had a radon test this week that came in. The family had been living there for maybe 4 years. It came back as a 9. This family's been living there with levels of 9. And it's an easy test. It's a 48-hour test. Get it done. Know your radon levels. And it is typical higher when it does rain. So I do like doing my inspections and starting radon testing in the rain, so that's also good too, because sometimes when you do your home inspection during the rain, you can see where water is sitting and possible problems that could arise. So don't put off your home inspection just because it's raining. That's actually a good thing.
Yeah. And for those listening, we have a whole Radon 101 episode you can listen to that's super insightful. And I encourage everyone to do that. Even if you think you don't live in an area with high radon, those radon maps are very outdated. And your neighbor may not have a problem, but you might. And there is no safe level of radon indoors, but the government does recommend that you intervene. I think it's 4 picocuries, anything over that. And it is a relatively, and I say relatively, straightforward solution when it comes to radon mitigation. But we talk about that in that episode. So you're having either doing a home inspector, an HVAC person, possibly a roofer. I mean, all of those things, are those all coordinated on the same day? Like when you put in an offer, are you changing what you write in that contract so that you can allow for this? Like, how do you navigate that so that you're even allowed to, get your foot in the door and get your contract accepted?
So here in Georgia, we have something called due diligence. So we negotiate our days. How many days do we need? Do we need 7 days? Do we need 10 days? And here we don't disclose who we're having come out. I
Mhm.
just recommend, and I do try to respect the sellers and try to get everybody out within 1 to 2 days of being close to each other. So I'm not every day bothering them with schedules and make sure when it comes to this you need to make sure you're getting a mold inspection on top of that. And then are you on a septic tank or sewer? On my septic tanks, I do request the sellers to either get a clear, service letter, maybe have it pumped and service and get a clearance letter on that. And then when you're doing your home inspection, do check with your inspector and see if they offer a sewer scope. If not, you can reach out to your local plumber. Just make sure there's no roots or anything that could cause problems in that sewer line. So there are some inspections like the ones that I do that I want to make sure that my clients do get, and make sure, of course, rodent and termites. So yeah, that's a must.
Yeah, and I want to zoom in on something you said. It was really important because there is a big difference between a home inspector and a knowledgeable indoor environmental professional, or an IEP for short. And one of the ways I like to explain this to people is you can think of your home inspector kind of like your general practitioner. You go to for your doctor, right? But if you end up needing to see like somebody for dermatology because you have a mole and they suspect, you're going to a specialist for that, or whatever the case may be. And so for your home, yes, and I'm not knocking home inspectors, but they're focusing on a lot of other things. And you want someone who really prioritizes and understands that mold and water damage is often hidden, right? And what we see is merely the tip of the iceberg. And so you want those thorough inspections in the attic. You want them looking in ductwork, underneath sinks, taking more detailed moisture readings than your home inspector might. And so I love this idea of these team of people. And I think a hard thing for buyers to wrap their head around is you're spending money. That is true, right? You're investing some upfront costs. But if you find out these issues ahead of time, you can negotiate, you can save yourself money. Maybe you choose to, back out of the contract. That does happen from time to time. But let's talk for a minute more about like disclosures. And again, knowing that it varies by state, is what are you seeing in Georgia where you are? Like, are sellers required to disclose mold and water damage? Have you found like more often than not in most states, it's up to the homeowner? Can you just speak broadly to that?
So we do have a set of disclosures here in Georgia that does ask for like water intrusion, have you had some sort of a leak, which is good. But you, as a buyer, beware if it's not listed on there, that doesn't mean, maybe this homeowner had only lived there 3 years. We don't know what happened in 1996, with that homeowner that might have lived there 7 years. So we do lose a lot of the history. It's only, during that time. And so I would say have your insurance company pull a report and see if there's a history of a leak, a flood, or something like that. I think that's a good way to do that. I mean, then the history.
Are you talking about a clue report?
Yes, it's called a clue report.
Yeah, and that's something that you as the, person trying to buy the home can't request, but the sellers can. And it gives, my understanding is, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, is it gives kind of what has been reported in terms of like insurance claims on the home. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. And a lot of buyers can call their insurance companies too and say, "Hey, we're going to be getting, insurance on this home, and see, is this on a flood? Is this on a FEMA flood?" Ask questions, do it at the beginning before towards the end because I've had people call and they've found out, well, I can't really get this house covered because it had two roof claims. the insurance company can give you some reasons why on what happened in the past, and maybe it wasn't disclosed, but
Mhm.
you really need to do your research, and that's something that your realtor cannot do for you. I mean, you have to advocate for yourself as well. Your realtor can, only do so much in that process and give you the information that they collect and ask for you. But we're can't do it all.
Yeah, and listen, like there's no like foolproof strategy here. The idea is that you can collect as much information and data as you can. And just to kind of zoom in on something for a moment, even with disclosures, because something like mold and water damage is not really regulated, even if they fixed it, and if you're listening on the podcast, I'm using air quotes, doesn't mean they did so safely and effectively, right? So they can say, well, we addressed that leaky window, and maybe they just like reset the window or something. They didn't bother removing the water damage and any mold underneath and things like that. Or maybe their form of remediation was to put a bunch of I don't know what to name it, a paint on it that quote unquote kills it, which it doesn't, folks. So you want to probe more. So just because an issue was addressed doesn't mean it was addressed so safely and effectively, and it can still be an issue. That's why the history matters. And I think too, one of the challenges, and I don't know if there's a strategy you have, when people get ready to put their homes on the market, they often like repaint. And this
Yeah.
is not even for flips. And the problem and challenges when you repaint is you cover up some of those signs of water damage. And so again, that's where you're really trying to be a detective here. You're looking for buckling, separating of materials. Ask like, is it a red flag to you if a home was recently painted? Are you like, oh, maybe there's something going on here? Or are you thinking like, oh, maybe they're just getting it ready for market?
Right. So it could be both, but that's where the investigation, comes in, and that's where your inspectors come in because, they might get up in that attic and find an issue. You might not see it because it was freshly painted. And you do have to, just do your investigations, and that's the important part is having your team out there. And I love what you were, just saying. So it really is important to have that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you're, I just want to do a plug too. If you're looking for a good IEP, whether you're looking to buy a home and you're in the inspection period or just in general because you're concerned about your current home, if you head on over to changetheairfoundation.org, go to our resources, the very first thing you're going to see is our Start Here tab. That takes you step by step through the inspection and remediation process. Step one is all about finding a good IEP. That is a field that is not really regulated either. So not all people are good. We're not going to get into that here, but I promise you, if you're looking for an IEP, please start there because we give you all the red flags, starting certifications, which are minimal starting points, but how you avoid those IEPs that are just going to take a few random air tests as opposed to doing the level of investigation that you need to feel a little more comfortable about what's going on in or possibly going on in the home. Okay, so when so let's say you've narrowed it down with your clients, they fall in love with this house, they want this house. We've talked about you're going to bring in a variety of professionals during that period. What happens if you're under contract and you find a bunch of issues? Is it better to walk away? Is it better to have the seller fix it? Or is it better for you to maybe negotiate money back and you fix it so you're in control? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. I have, yeah, lots of ideas and thoughts. And it happens all the time. Nobody's going to come back with this perfectly clean
Right.
inspection report, but it really depends on, when we go through them, what are those issues? Is it just a loose railing or is it, something minor? Or did your inspections, your mold testing, whatever you're doing, what did it come back? What is the level of concern? And I always suggest if you want to move forward, and this is something that you feel like, oh, I can get this fixed. I feel comfortable with moving forward. It's not like a lot of red flags, based on, the information you're getting, your mold, your roof, your HVAC, but understanding that you've got good mechanicals and you feel like the home is in a good shape. And then you always I suggest ask the seller to give you the funds so you can hire the contractors that you trust, that you know, and that you have control over. Because you might ask them to fix something and they could have, somebody down the road do it. That's not, to your level of expectations.
Yeah, and I can't reemphasize that enough. Circling back to my original story about the first time we bought a home, we had them do it. We ended up having to redo that area to make sure that it was remediated properly and the actual moisture source was corrected. And so in hindsight, that was a lesson learned, because they're going to do it for as cheap as possible, right? Um, the other thing, and I forgot to mention this when we were talking about disclosures too, is I think sometimes that this assumes that the owner of the home is actually aware of some of these issues. And as I know, Tori, and we talk about all the time at Change Your Foundation, a lot of these issues are just hidden. It's not like a burst pipe. That's obvious to most people, but not if you're having condensation issues in the attic, or maybe interior ductwork that's behind walls, or the flashing on a window. And so I know sometimes people are like, oh, they lied and covered it up. I think a lot of the time people just don't know. And that's because uh, as homeowners, we aren't always, we don't always understand the maintenance and some of these things in our homes that we should be doing. We don't always know that we should be looking for them. So there's, even if it's not disclosed, there could still be issues. Again, don't ever skip that inspection period. I always thought that was wild when people would waive the inspection, and I get it in a competitive market. But you really are taking a gamble there that can end up costing you way more money down the
And
road.
you can shorten that time, you don't in a competitive market, and I did a lot of real estate during that crazy time, but we never sacrificed our inspections. And I made it very clear, and having that communication with the listing agent, saying, hey, I've got this family that has really struggled, with whatever. And I just want you to know that we're, very serious. They really love this home, and we are going to come in and do some inspections, but we're going to shorten that down. And I can get people out. My vendors, understand the necessity, and we can get out within a couple of days. So I can have that information back in less than 5 days. So there are ways around it, but I always say communication. I don't think that we communicate enough on what's happening. And sometimes sellers and sometimes listing agents don't even know um, different concerns that can be out there. And I do get thanked a lot from agents that co-op with me and say, wow, Tori, you really showed me a lot, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to take what you've said and done over this process into consideration for my future clients, and having these conversations, because we never maybe thought about having some of this come out, inspections and stuff like that.
Yeah, and we say all this, and I know we make it sound simple, and I want to take a moment and recognize that it's not, and there's so much at stake, not just financially, but emotionally and logistically. And I know too, like if you find a house and you fall in love, right? Maybe you love the kitchen or whatever, you can sometimes have the blinders on, and really what I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, when you go in and you're looking at a home, you really want to be, not that you want to keep the emotion out of it, because that is part of buying a home, but you want to try to really approach this almost like methodically. And where, as tempting as it is to be like fawning over the kitchen, like make sure you're looking at those baseboards and under sinks, and you're looking for ceiling stains, and you can peek in the vents with your flashlight. Because those things, after the newness of the wonderful kitchen or whatever feature you fell in love with, are going to matter. And so I know we're kind of talking about this like, oh, it's just as easy. We know that there's a lot that goes into this and a lot of logistics, but I love that you started off our conversation with eliminating homes kind of right off the bat before you even get down to the contract phase, because you can eliminate a lot, I think, when you know what you're looking for. And the other thing, and then I promise I'll stop talking, that I want to like recognize, and you said it before, Tori, was that there is no perfect home. So I've always said to people, if you get a home inspection and they find nothing, they weren't looking well enough,
Right.
right? Like what shortcuts did they take that they didn't find something? So,
Exactly.
and I think people need to hear that too. Like that doesn't mean like that home isn't going to work for you or bring you healing and health. I would just rather know, like, hey, there's this area we know from my IEP who is here. We think it's really localized. It looks like, whatever it is, you want that information. And then
Correct.
so you can take steps to correct it. So again, there's no perfect home. And I always get a little nervous. I'm like, oh, they found nothing. And I was like, well, what did that look like? Like
Yeah,
what professionals were involved and what were they doing or not doing if they didn't find a single thing, whether it's new or old, like they're gonna find something.
exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. So what are are there certain home features that you have found that tend to be more problematic, either from like a moisture control issue? Like I always found like bay windows. And
Mhm.
again, folks, I'm not basing this off any data other than my own personal experience, tend to be a little leakier. Is there anything where you're like, oh, we want to be careful around skylights or whatever? Are there any things like that?
Those are two very important features that we do see a lot of, either condensation, moisture during the inspection period, what the professional what they do find. But another thing is interesting is the spray foam. I mean, when that gets wet, a lot of times, it's not able to be found right away. So that's a big feature. And I know a lot of new construction, builders do want to use that. So I would say do your research on a spray foam, what that looks like and do your own, just have your own information on that. But from what I found, that is a concern.
Yeah, and for those listening, spray foam can be used in different ways. Sometimes it's like the entire insulation, like, and you can see it like in an attic, right? You probably couldn't see it behind like walls in a room, but sometimes it's just used to like close up small penetrations, maybe where wires are, and it's very localized. But um, the type of insulation does matter, and we'll have to have a whole episode. I think I'll have to do at some
Yeah.
point on spray foam and insulation. That's on my docket of things that we want to cover because there's some pros and cons to the different options out there that people need to be aware of. Okay, so those are three helpful ones to kind of think about. So are there some mistakes you see buyers making just in general when it comes to buying a home when they're being kind of health conscious?
Yes, I think that, we really just focus on, a lot of not that it's a bad thing, but neighborhoods and, they they will sometimes and also they'll maybe not be as concerned or some people are as concerned with maybe different power lines, power plants, is there a factory nearby? There's conversations that we need to have on their concerns, environmentally, 5G towers. Is there a stream or a creek? Is there a dump site nearby? So there are conversations to have and things to be aware of when you are in this process. It's not just necessarily, the floor plan of the home, it's really a whole package that you really want to consider when you are looking.
Yeah, I'll tell a quick funny story about that. I had a friend many years ago, and we lived just outside of Washington, D.C., and it's very densely populated, expensive area, and real estate's of a prime. And he got a nice location that was close to a metro stop, and he went into the contract to rent the home in the winter. Well, come summer or even late spring, he didn't realize that they were less than a quarter of a mile from like a water waste treatment plant. The entire area reeks of like sewage. And this is a prime area to live in during the hot, humid summer months of DC.
Oh,
And you can smell it in the whole area, no matter where you are. And I liked, he was a young guy and he didn't care as much. But like looking back, it's like that might have been something good for him to know prior to moving in. And hey, in the summer,
right. Yeah.
down the road, there's this plant, or maybe if you're near a highway or certain power lines, these are things to pay attention to as well.
Exactly. And there'll be so many times we'll be out either on the back deck saying, okay, do we hear the highway? Do we hear the road? It's just, go out and just really hear the environment. Look around, look up, do you have a lot of tree limbs possibly during a storm? Could that pose a problem?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things to really look at in the home buying process.
So as we kind of bring it to a close, are there two or three just tips you could leave our listeners with right now of things to keep in mind if they're whether they're mold sensitized or multiple chemical sensitivities or EMFs, whatever they're paying attention to? Are there like two or three of your top tips?
Yes, I mean, don't panic, don't stress. I see so many people that are really, really stressed, and it's understandable because it is can be a very stressful, time in buying a house. But, really talk to a realtor and work with somebody that really understands you and hears you. I think that is really, putting your team in place and having that advocate for you that understands and that can go, to the seller, to the selling listing agent and say, hey, this is the concerns that, we have, and this is the information we need to get. Or, maybe that realtor can, really vet a lot of the vendors for you. So that's really a good way to, approach it and to start that process. So, and there are, a couple other things that, they might want to do, during the process. And, do they want basements, having conversations about crawl spaces, because we do know, during, with the whole moisture, and that could be a concern for families, and finding out just, how that looks for them. And then just, just doing your research on everything, how everything looks for you.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into my next question. So how would somebody find like a holistic realtor like yourself? Like, is there a network? Is there a certification? Is there a website? Like, how do we find people like you to help us with the home buying process?
So, right now I have created like a small little network. I've been trying to reach out to different agents around and have conversations with them. For me, I decided, to get into building biology. I wanted to have a certification behind me and the education so I can best help, my clients. Some agents might call themselves holistic. So you want to ask them, what experience do you have, or what certifications, what is your knowledge of this? You don't want to just work with somebody that's calling themselves that. You do want to, interview them, and it's okay to ask questions, and have that conversation. I just think it's really important to have. But there are different, there's different, ones out there in different states that I have, really vetted and really tried, but there's no, certification for us. I am working on a small one right now. Hopefully I can, bring some more education to this field of more wellness in the real estate market, because it is so important to have this knowledge. And I want to be more educated than my buyers. So it's important that, us as professionals are more educated and knowledgeable of them so we can, help guide them.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan, if you listened to the podcast before, of vetting anyone you hire. Well, and you can do it in a way that is respectful of their time and, shows kindness and stuff. But you can say things like, have you worked with families who have, children with autism who may need to be more concerned about X, Y, and Z? Have you worked with families who have someone who's immunocompromised and needs to be, particularly conscious about moisture and mold, or whatever it is, and have those conversations up front? And I know people think, well, then they're going to reject me, maybe. Yeah, that's true. They might, but that means it wasn't a good fit.
Right.
Whether it's the realtor or the person selling the home or the IEP or the mediator, if you do that up front and they reject you, it probably wasn't going to work out to your benefit anyway. And so don't lose faith there. I love that. I know you're networking and you're building with working with other realtors in other areas to do this, but that's amazing. So my last question to you is, if people had follow-up questions for you though, how could they get into contact with you? How could they find you?
They can check me on my website. They can sign up for my monthly wellness real estate newsletter on there.
What's the website? Oh,
It's
sorry.
at it's at atlantaholisticrealtor.com. And they can also follow me on Instagram, Holistic Home Expert. And so I always, share information out there about wellness real estate, just different little tips, and reach out to me if you have any concerns or want to find maybe a professional in your area that I can help connect you with. I am so happy to do that because this is really a passion and it's so important. And I feel like I see people on different groups, Facebook groups, all the time, just needing somebody to listen to them and help, give them the information and vendors and connect them in the right direction. You're just starting out in this process, so don't stress, but get your team together and ask for, different reviews or references, and just make sure you speak to the person that you're working with, because I get calls all the time. Well, I bought a house 4 months ago from a friend of mine. Her best friend just got her real estate license, and now I've got this, all this going on, and you really want to catch it before it become, before you move forward to the closing. You really want to either walk away or, just really take care of the issue prior.
Yeah, that's helpful. And we'll link to all of that in the show notes. And also, if you're listening, uh, I believe it was in 2023, we had a series on tips for buying a home. And we had an IEP, Michael Strentz. He did 2 episodes, things that to consider from an IEP's perspective. We have a builder who gave his perspective on tips for buying and renting a home. We also had a home inspector. And so we have other resources that we're going to link to in the show notes as you kind of do this deep dive to prepare. One of my mottos is research before you react, because I think it will save you a lot of time and stress and frustration down the road. So thank you, Tori, so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it and love everything that you're doing.
No, thank you. And for everyone listening, if you found this information helpful, if you want to see more resources like this, free downloads, other expert advice and tips, head on over to changetheyearfoundation.org and sign up for our newsletter.